Good. Right. Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks, Attendees, for coming along to this extra OREF meeting. We're going to hear from Naomi in a minute about the Orkney Local Transport Strategy, which she's going to give a presentation at the start. In fact, I'm really going to hand over to her completely and stop prattling about. But the idea is that what we want to do is try and make this interactive. So I'm going to send a link which people should get in the chat in a minute, which is a thing called a Jamboard, which is basically an online tool that allows people to stick post-its onto a virtual wall. So we'll see if this works during the course of the process. Otherwise, we'll just resort to the old way of frantically scribbling notes on bits of paper and trying to make sense out of what people said later. But at least we have the recording, so that's a good start. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Naomi while I fiddle around trying to get the Jamboard thing going. So Naomi, you have control.
Super. Thank you very much, Neil. And while you're doing that, I should have been fiddling around firing up the presentation, so I'll also fiddle around as well on that. But while I'm doing that, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for giving up your time this evening. I'm working with Anne, who's also on the meeting with a group of colleagues developing this, the local transport strategy. We're working on behalf of the council. And what I wanted to do, quite interestingly, I'm quite looking forward to seeing how this Jamboard works, because one of my biggest misses of doing these kind of meetings in real is post-it notes. I'm a post-it note lover, so I'm hoping this kind of virtual post-it note thing takes off. So I'm really keen to see how that goes this evening. But yeah, just bear with me a second and I'll just attempt to share my screen. Is you in there for everybody?
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
Excellent. So what I wanted to do, there was that little bit of homework, Martin, but not too much. But what I wanted to do was just give a little bit of an overview of the work that we're undertaking in terms of the local transport strategy. And really what I want to do is open up and pose some questions and hopefully have a bit of a discussion and a bit of dialogue to help input and shape the local transport strategy. But yeah, so what I wanted to cover in terms of the presentation is a little bit of an overview of the process, say a little bit about the objectives that we're kind of developing and working with. And then the key element really, I wanted to give everybody a flavour. It won't be everything, but a flavour of the issues that are coming through. And I guess on the back of that, the opportunities, therefore, that we're looking at that will be within the local transport strategy. Then, like I say, open it up to give you guys a chance to input to that. In terms of our approach to this, to developing the strategy, and I should say Orkney hasn't had a local transport strategy. The current one goes way back to 2007, so it's very out of date, and it's fine now to get the opportunity to start to update this, because so much has changed. Perhaps much hasn't changed in terms of need and some of the issues, but so much has changed on so many different levels in terms of transport in that period. But what we've been doing, we really wanted to recognise that there's been lots of recent work undertaken, so many consultations, like the National Islands Plan, the National Transport Strategy, Scottish Transport Project Review, that I'm sure a number of people in the room will have been involved in at various different stages. And I think all these things have been asking fairly similar questions and no doubt gathering relatively similar feedback. We didn't want to repeat that exercise with the local transport strategy. What we wanted to try and do is dive a bit deeper in terms of understanding of the consequences, but also thinking more so about what some of the solutions would be that would work for Orkney and work for the Orkney context. So we've been trying to build on that earlier work without repeating it. But in doing that, we've also been undertaking a lot of conversations like this this evening with various different groups and various different individuals, some of whom are also in the room tonight, to kind of feed into the work and just make sure everything's still valid and everything kind of links. And on that theme of linking, we've been very much trying to link in with other work that's going on at the same time, that's I guess kind of developing in parallel and looking at kind of where we can complement. So things like people have maybe heard about recently the tourism infrastructure plan, the Orkney child poverty strategy work that's ongoing at the moment. So we're trying to make sure that everything's as aligned as possible. We also have some colleagues doing some tailored accessibility analysis for Orkney, which is something that hasn't really been done to that level before. And we're particularly going to be using that to look at different options for developing public and community transport. But ultimately what we're trying to do is put together an evidence local transport strategy, and one that in the past we've tended to look fairly short term, but we're wanting to do something that looks a bit more into the future and sets out kind of short-term actions, but also things that we need to be working on that will take a lot longer to come to fruition. And I think that next point I've put there is, I think we're kind of thinking about, I think there's a number of areas where we'll perhaps need to be more bold in terms of the action that we take and the direction that we take. And you know, I think that's something that would be good to pick up with yourselves in terms of how we can be bold in, you know, the area that you guys are perhaps particularly interested in. And then finally, we're very much trying to be mindful in terms of the strengths of the community in Orkney, the green economy and the importance of that, and also responding to the COVID experience and what's kind of come on the back of that. I wanted to say a little bit, I've probably touched on it just in terms of we've tried to link in with all these various different policies and strategies that are ongoing. Some of them are finalised and we're kind of taken from them. Others, like the National Planning Framework, are at kind of draft or earlier stages. Ferry Plan, which is going to, we believe, become an islands connectivity plan, a Scottish Islands connectivity plan next year, hopefully. So I think we've also got the opportunity in what we put together to inform these other pieces of work where they're at an earlier stage. So I think that's something that we've tried to be mindful of as we're going through this piece of work. And I should have said, please stop me if you want to ask anything as we're going through here. Please just indicate and I can stop and go into anything in any more detail. We've been looking to develop a kind of clear set of objectives that reflects all those other plans and strategies and the issues that we're starting to hear about, that tries to reflect all those different, I guess, dynamics for Orkney. So our starting point is around these kind of 4 themes, and these will be important insofar as we'll use these to test when we're coming up with ideas for projects or ideas for the direction of travel in terms of transport. We'll use these to test whether or not those ideas would help us achieve these aims and objectives. So probably it won't be any surprise, we've got themes around economic recovery, adaptation, resilience, and kind of building on the assets and the opportunities that we have within Orkney. We've got a strong theme around delivering climate action, both in terms of decarbonisation, and we've got climate change mitigation. Again, I'll just say these are draft. So again, happy to take any feedback on those when we get to that stage. Another theme around enabling participation, something that's more kind of, that's very people focused, community focused, thinking about health and well-being across our communities, both geographically, but also members of the community perhaps have particular characteristics but are dispersed across all of our geographical communities. And then a theme around preventing the long-term issues of poverty across Orkney. So I said, I guess the kind of meat of the presentation, I wanted to give a bit of a flavour of some of the kind of key issues that have been coming out through all the earlier studies that we've been looking at. We've been reviewing all those kind of earlier consultations, all the themes that I'm sure a number of you will have taken to various different workshops, etc., in the last few years. So I wanted to just give a flavour of those. And like I say, it's not an exhaustive list, but I thought it would be a useful starting point. So we just work our way around the slide. Firstly, we flag up here planning. And on the basis that transport need is very much determined by how we plan, the places we live in, our communities, etc. And I think I'd probably classify that transport need in Orkney at the moment is quite high and quite complex, because typically we've planned our communities to be really dispersed and for services to be really centralised, and therefore that generates a lot of need in terms of moving people to those centralised services, facilities, jobs, etc. Folk will probably have heard there's been an awful lot talk nationally around the concept of 20-minute communities, and particularly focusing on developing communities across Scotland that people can walk, cycle and public transport within 20 minutes. The National Planning Framework draft documentation that's been circulated in the last few weeks, that's also been talking about coming up with a bespoke solution to the 20-minute community concept for remote and island communities. So we're keen to develop what we perhaps mean by that in an Orkney context, to inform both our own work, but also to feed into that national piece of work. So I think there's a lot of issues around that kind of the concept of planning and how we perhaps, I guess, think more logically in terms of how we plan things in the future. And there's also been a lot of discussion, I guess, on the back of the COVID experience about better planning in terms of communities and thinking about community hubs, maybe having people working closer to home, perhaps working from hubs or home some of the time, and just developing those kind of community concepts. So that was the first key issue or theme that I wanted to highlight. The second was around public transport and community transport and the future of that. Again, I think it would be fair to say that the network across Orkney is relatively minimal in terms of coverage, and there's certainly massive gaps both geographically, but also typically the bus services on the mainland, apart from the core X1 route, kind of focus on the what we used to call the workers buses, so they get in for 9 and the back out again at the back of 5. So I think that kind of traditional model of provision is really difficult to improve upon without massive additional expenditure. So I think we need to look at a very different approach to that. If we can do something that is more based on need and on, more equitable access, but also linked to the issues around just transition. So I think there's lots we need to look at in terms of public transport and community transport. Next theme was active travel. And I think people often refer to Orkney as having poor weather and having poor infrastructure and being a really car-based culture. But in 2019, Orkney actually came second in the league table of how many people walk to work, right, compared to the rest of Scotland. So there is actually a strong base there. We just kind of underplay it, I think, quite often. And I think there's an increase in demand from visitors in terms of, I guess, the kind of green tourism concept, some arriving with vehicles, some without. And I think that's something that we can look at and build upon. It would be missing if we didn't talk about inter-isle transport, about ferries and planes. And I think there's been a focus more and more through recent pieces of work on ever-increasing connectivity, providing more ferries, more planes. And I think that there's kind of parts of the network that that's going to be one of the options. But there's also a need to focus on and think, I guess, a little bit more deeply in terms of what are the right measures in order to protect and boost our islands, both economically and socially. And I guess the character of our islands. So it perhaps link back to some of the earlier points around community and having a place-based approach. It might not be the same everywhere. And then there's obviously issues around funding for inter-isle transport and linking in with one of the later themes around you know, how we fuel, I guess, inter-rail transport. I wanted to highlight tourism and some of the issues that we've been speaking about in terms of a desire and a need to disperse visitors, ensure there's kind of benefit right across Orkney from the visitors that are coming to Orkney, and also from a transport perspective, also looking at relieving some of the pressures around the honeypot sites, and if there are kind of transport things that we need to do from there. And I guess in terms of opportunity, also thinking about if we can build things in terms of public transport that maybe in terms of network that maybe works for visitors, but also works for community as well in terms of having more public transport opportunities. And then finally, I wanted to touch on decarbonisation. I think building on the Green Orkney image, I think that Orkney has through a lot of the work that's gone before. I've pinched your chart there, Neil, that I think you put up on Facebook. And yeah, I don't think I'll say too much in this area because I'm hoping that you'll say lots to me about this area. You know, we know we've got a high level of electric vehicles in Orkney, loads of opportunities and loads of work being done also in terms of aviation, ferry design, etc. And, you know, it maybe comes back to the point I made nearer the start in terms of, you know, how can we be bold? How can we really progress in this area and probably connected to some of those other issues and themes that I've been speaking about as well. I don't have a, yeah, that's fine. I was going to say I don't have a, my clock's not showing on my screen, so I'm not sure how long I've been talking at you for. But yeah, that's kind of a bit of an overview. I hope it wasn't too quick, but I just wanted to give a little bit of a flavour. But really what I wanted to do, and I've just tried to put some of those points down on this slide, is I think there's genuinely an opportunity for folk to feed in and shape, you know, what we come up with in terms of putting together this local transport strategy. And we're trying to kind of balance things between delivering some of the direction from Scottish Government and from other locations, but we also very much want to make sure that it works for Orkney. It's got that kind of steer from, you know, people within Orkney, people from coming from various different interests. So in that first line there, I wondered if a first question could be around, you know, are some of those issues that I've described, are they valid from your perspective? And are there any kind of key themes or key issues that I've not touched on tonight? It might be things we've already got covered, but it'd be useful just to, I guess, do that sense check that, you know, we've got those kind of key things captured. So I don't know whether I'll maybe stop there, Neil, because in that second block, there's also some other specific questions. But I wondered if we did start with that kind of, you know, are those issues valid, or is there some particular things that would be good to tease out a bit further?
Yeah, that's fine, Naomi. Thanks very much indeed for that. I think that's a really good introduction and a good place to start. So has anybody got any burning pieces they wanted to bring up? Oh, before we do that, sorry, just cut myself off there quickly. So in terms of the Jamboard side of things, I hope people could see the link in chat. That should have opened up basically a Google facility which allows you to put post-its and bits and pieces on it. There are 4 pages to the system as we've got it at the moment, and if you just flick through those, Nick, go.
I think we're in view only. I think you have to give us edit access to be able to put something on it.
Okay, I'll look for that. Thanks, Nick.
And top
right-hand corner, there's a note.
Will I stop sharing?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. So Nick, say again in terms of the
top right-hand corner of the page. It says we're view only, and the drop box says you can only view this document. To make changes, ask the owner for edit access. And I did click the button requesting edit access. Okay,
just see what we got here. Sorry about this. Not seeing that myself. Okay, give me a second. What did you click on the second version of the link I gave you?
Yep.
Yes, I did. I couldn't access at all with the other link. The first
Okay, that's okay. So that's some progress then. That's a good start. Right.
Oh, it seems I can add a poster to that second one.
Okay, so
Oh, that's maybe because.
Yeah, I might have given you access earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, give me a second. I'm just working on it. I've got 13 viewers on it at the moment, but not. How's this on? Working out what that does. Hold on a minute. Present a meeting. No, no one.
I suspect that if Naomi can do it, Naomi appeared as a named person on it. Everybody else is anonymous something, anonymous frog or anonymous cock.
I think you're right. Give me a second.
Or anonymous dinosaur.
Edit listing change, permission to share. Viewers and they can see options to download and print. I'm taking that off. That's good. Oh, that's rather annoying. Okay. Oh, well, I'll change the link.
Well, whilst fighting with the technology, a thought I have about the overall strategy is that the biggest thing that's changed since it was done last is climate change, and that probably a starting point to everything now is going to be to look at the carbon impact of each of the elements of transport in Orkney, and don't make any decisions without looking at what impact it has on our carbon footprint.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the Scottish Government set a target where we're supposed to reduce by 3/4 by 2030 and get rid of the last quarter by 2045.
Yeah.
I think I might have cleared it to see if others can edit. Can I just check? Has anybody tried to edit?
That's looking good.
Yes, I've tried and I've failed. My screen still says view only.
So does mine.
Mine says you.
If you refresh the screen.
Oh, yes, okay, thanks. Good idea.
Susan Santander, you were in, was it?
That's it. Yes, that's gone away. Good. That's
Okay.
refresh.
All right, so here we go. Okay, so we've basically got the 4 screens. First one, local transport strategy, and then we've basically got some of the modes on the second bit for land transport. The third screen is really about sea ferries and aviation, and the fourth one is about changes we want to make in the next few years and a medium and longer term. So Naomi, I take it you don't have any particular worry about colour choices, but it would be useful, I think, if people possibly put their initials on these so we can then hopefully get back to people if there's a need. Would that be all right?
That would be fab if it's okay, yeah, really good.
Okay. So, hang on a second. So, I'm just wondering if people have got any particular thoughts they did want to put down. So what I've heard at the moment is about making sure we got the understanding of the carbon impact.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously really key. It's obviously really key in terms of what I was saying around, do we need to be more bold? And it's also key in terms of that's one of our, really high level objectives now, which has never been the case in the past. I think last time round we probably had a wishy-washy environmental objective, nothing very specific.
And that's also very much in the NPF 4 planning framework 4 has put the environment front and centre in this. So I think the timing is exactly right with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Naomi,
It'll be a key part of appraising all the options once we get to that stage. So it's, you know, it's an absolutely vital part of that evaluation criteria for coming up with what's actually going to be the interventions in the, although we're not at that stage yet.
Naomi, I didn't see economic impact on your key criteria. So, you know, what does it do for the economy?
No, that's definitely up there as well. So, well, we're talking about economic recovery, adaptation, resilience, and security to build on Orkney's assets and opportunities. So economy's up there as well in terms of that kind of, you know, that kind of high level objective, definitely. So it's economy, climate, participation, and poverty is the kind of four that we're looking at the moment. But like I say, they're draft and happy to take any comments on them.
I suppose it's the nuance between economic recovery and economic growth, but
yeah,
I mean, I think it's there worded in that objective. We maybe just need to make it a bit clearer.
Yeah.
So I'm not seeing anybody violently disagreeing with any of that lot, Naomi, as a starting point. So that's good. So we like that. So you posed. Do you want to go on to the questions, the four or five questions you posed?
Sure. Yeah. So the first kind of question that I thought would be useful to get feedback on is, from all your experience, are there things from a transport perspective that work well? That might be in Orkney, or it might be things you've seen or read about further afield. Are there things that work well that we could build on, or that we could bring to Orkney?
Anyone want to chip in first?
Well, the electric A9 almost works. The Scottish Government had a strategy of making sure there were charging points at suitable intervals all the way up the A9. And yes, it does work, but only because there was a strategy.
That's a big problem, because they've only had a strategy for the A9. So the A82 was a shambles, which is the other route to Inverness from the Central Belt.
Ah, but the question was what works, not what doesn't work.
All right, well. Okay.
And so I guess building on that, what is there an Orkney interpretation of that in terms of a core route, or?
I think it'd be rather different for.
Yeah.
Well,
yes, there is, because in Orkney we have a unique situation where people spend a fair amount of time stationary in their cars waiting for a ferry. But it's not easy at that point to charge your car, partly because they're made up your charger, and also because the grumpy manny doesn't want you to leave the queue and go and plug in. So there is a big opportunity there to provide people with a top-up.
So I would disagree with that.
Yeah.
Because I think what I want to do is understand the bounding of the study, because if it is about travelling within the county, that's one thing. Travelling to the county is something rather different. So I think the point about the A9 is good to get you to and from the county. But I don't think, given the size of Orkney, there are many routes in Orkney which require substantive numbers of charges along them for picking up charge. I would suggest most people are going to start their day with charge and are going to end their day at somewhere with a charger. So the number of people who need en route charging during the day is actually going to be quite small. So I don't think the ferries are themselves a very fertile place for looking to do charging, because most people will get on the ferry only having used whatever charge it was that got them from home to the ferry. One thing I have found that I've seen that works well, I think we should be seriously considering, is that of the electrification of our vessels. Certainly the Interrails, none of the routes are beyond the capability of an electric vessel today. The question is it economic to do that, or should it be ammonia or something else? But I would strongly suggest they should be electric first and foremost. And bearing in mind I'm involved with hydrogen projects, I'm still saying they should be electric.
Do you have any insight, Neil, into where it's going on the sort of the government decision to fund ferries, and whether electric is actually being included as an option?
It doesn't seem to be being talked about very much at the moment. They seem to be stuck in this god-awful mess with Ferguson's and the LNG side of things, but I think LNG's a busted flush and we're past that now. So I know hydrogen is quite sexy, so there's quite a lot of talk about that. But in terms of the practicalities of things like, say, the MVL in Denmark, which is doing significant ranges, truck carrying, higher speed, but the main point is it's a catamaran, and we've got to go to cats. We just got to stop building skips and go to cats. So that feels as though that's a fundamental piece within the transport strategy for energy efficiency, because the general displacement hulls are so poor. But I've certainly seen that working well elsewhere.
What do the islands think about who is going to pay to replace the internal ferries?
Does it really matter? At the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure we have a ferry. Hey, you're going to have a ferry, or a causeway, or isolation. So there's your three options, or a tunnel, I suppose.
Yeah, but to me, it seems it's falling between it's nobody's business. So there isn't a strategy to replace the ferries because nobody thinks they own it.
Yeah. So I think I would have thought the strategy is the ferries need to be replaced.
Yeah.
Exactly who, there'll be some fighting and shoving, but that's probably beyond our pay grade on that one, I think.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's right enough. But I think we have you're right, the ferries need to be replaced. We'll have the opportunity to talk about replace with what, and to inform that, then, hopefully some people will make some progress somewhere at a political level.
Anything else that we think works well?
There's a couple of hands up there. I'm seeing.
I can't see hands and type as well at the same time. So sorry about that.
Okay. I think I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but I wonder if Jonathan's hand was up first.
Thank you. Yeah. The strategy with cars and small commercials going electric is working well. I think what we need next is a strategy from OIC working with commercial organisations with themselves to have a strategy for commercial sized vehicles, 7.5 ton above, that go either electric or hydrogen, and have a joint strategy between OIC and commercial organisations to bring that forward. Because we can't really afford to do it piecemeal. There's got to be a whole island approach. That's me.
And who is going to pay for the commercial sector to invest to pay for that change, do you think?
Well, I think that's why you've got to have a integrated approach between OIC, commercial, and national government to work out how you're going to do it. You've got to have the infrastructure put in place to do it, and you've got to get everybody to buy into it to make it viable and get it done.
Thank you. I think maybe Willie next, was it? And then Mike.
Can I just quickly say something, Naomi? I misunderstood. I thought we were supposed to be sticking sticky notes on the other sheet, so that's what I've been doing for the last 5 minutes. I don't know you were actually having a discussion back on the Zoom meeting. Sorry.
Oh no, that's fine. I think we're doing both and happy to kind of collate things between both sources. I think it's useful just sometimes talking things to, you know, prompt different ideas, I guess, as we do if we're all in the same room. But we'll take from both sources.
It's just I can only see one or the other on my screen. My screen's not big enough to have them both on simultaneously.
Yeah.
You should be able to hear still.
Yeah, I was kind of listening, but I was thinking, who's putting these on the? No, nobody seems to be putting the post-it notes up. That's what I was thinking. Sorry.
Well, I think what we'll maybe do if it's useful at the end, because I know there were some people that weren't able to attend tonight. I've taken some notes and Anne has taken some notes also. So we'll after the meeting just read through the board and put anything extra up that hasn't been put up on a poster already, just so we've got a kind of collated resource that we can share with everybody, if that's okay.
Terrible feedback.
Right, if everybody can mute except Willie. Right.
It's Willie's that's feeding back.
It is.
My apologies, I can't seem to unmute it. Hello? Oh yes, you can hear me, that's okay.
Willie, you seem to
I
be...
do apologise, but...
You seem to be in twice. I'm trying to work out how.
If it's operator, one of my concerns about the talk of updating ferries is that the internal ones are at a stage, as everybody knows, that it's quite urgent. But the thing we've got to be very careful about is you're talking about something that's got to last you 30 or 35 years. And we don't want the usual politicians thing, just throw a lot of money at it without thinking it through. There's so many potential developments that must be taken into consideration before you dive into something. I would totally agree that there is worthwhile looking seriously at electric. As somebody else has already said, the LNG is past and not worth thinking about anymore, I don't think. Particularly for the smaller ones. Hydrogen may well have something going for it, but we just need to be careful that there is not a large amount of money thrown at it. I mean, I'm not overly critical. We've got luckily had a big investment in 2002 for the external projects, but the other side to the coin was it was done in such a hurry. The money could have been much better spent. That's one of my concerns. I'll try and mute out of this now, and apologies if it's me that's causing the feedback.
Willie, I've sorted it. I've knocked off your other one. You're okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, and then Dave.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm just sort of harking back onto the ferries again. I think the main point is that those ferries are long overdue for replacement, and really, really long overdue for replacement. And I am not sure about the getting ferries now to last 30 years, because that's the ferries that we've got at the moment. They are 30 years old. There are no spares for them. They break down all the time. And I mean, the bizarre situation of having a ferry where the disabled toilet is up a flight of stairs is so beyond any imagination that you wonder how on earth it ever got put in the first place. But the most important thing, I think, surely out of all of this is that whatever goes in has to be focused on net zero. That you really have to think of nothing else to begin with than whatever we do, it's got to be net zero, because it has to last well beyond the dates that that have already been set, the targets that have been set. And there are, in fact, established, I know Neil spoke about catamarans, they are widely used throughout the world in waters that are very similar to we have here, and electrification of them is coming along apace. It's not something where we're doing groundbreaking work. We're not having to invent anything new. It's already in place. There are designs ready to be used if only there was the political or the will to get on and do it. And I think partly what has to be done is not to say somebody will sort it out, but that a lot of people like us have to make a big fuss about this and say, stop messing around, get on and do it.
Thank you. Yeah. Dave?
Okay, I'll chip in there and I'll say what we need is children across the ferries as they board protesting and saying, we're not putting up with this anymore. Anyway, what I really wanted to say was, going back to your question about what works and how might it be applied to Orkney. I think Boris bikes work in London, quite to my surprise, and they're now sort of spreading to other cities, as you probably know, in a private, even cheaper capacity. And it seems to me that there's a great immediate opportunity to add to buying an internal ferry ticket, to add a tick box that says, do you want to hire a bike? And then what you do is you say you want 2 bikes, and they just put 2 bikes on the ferry for you at Kirkwall, and you've got them, and you can set off. And that would, as well as saving carbon, it would discourage tourists from taking their cars to islands, which would not solve but alleviate the problem of capacity on the ferries in the summer months.
Yeah, thank you for that. And being an island dweller, I'm over on Stronsey. This summer particularly, the increase in the number of visitors, both visitors just coming from the Orkney mainland or coming from further afield, coming on bikes, was just massive. You know, you could see it firsthand. And there's something to build on there. A number of the islands have bike hire schemes, a lot of them through the development trusts. So I think there's, but it's kind of piecemeal. I think there's really something to build on there, and we can kind of use technology to help with that in terms of, like you say, booking and adding that onto your booking and things like that. So I think that's a really good idea. Ooh. So I think I will try and do better at this hands up thing. I think Susan, and then maybe Neil, and then Willie.
Yep, I found it. It's at the bottom on Zoom. On Teams, it's on the top. Oh, so many platforms, so little time. All right, there is definitely something that works, and that is constraint. So especially when you're talking about the visitor numbers and their ability to drive their caravan over to do the loop and get back on and go out. It is absolutely possible to constrain that, to set a constraint. So if you look at the, any of these national parks, things that are just, there's too many people who want to go into them. So you set up a booking system, and the number of accesses is constrained, and you just book in, and so it goes. Your experience when you come is better, and that's just so constraint works.
Neil.
So just picking on the point that was made about the electric bikes, I also think there's a huge opportunity if we solidly have a go at car clubs for the for people coming in from the Isles. So to my mind, if I am a visitor wanting to go to one of the Isles, to know I can easily pick up a co-wheels or similar car at the ferry at the other end means I don't have to take the car with me, because the car really doesn't want to go on holiday. It's not that interested, so you get on the ferry and know there's a car at the other end. That's one part. Same thing will work the other way for islanders coming in to mainland, being able to know that you can pick up a car formally rather than just the keys are on the visor or on the wheel. I do think there's an opportunity to do something there, and that's where I do think there is an opportunity for quite a bit of car charging adjacent to the ferries, but not with a view to taking the car onto the ferry. It's actually instead of taking the car onto the ferry. So there'll be numbers of the cars parked at either end which would be usable. Whether there's also then scope to expand that to for some people who are going to commute. I know in London, I've got a friend who has a Tesla, who drives to London, who then basically gives it to somebody who runs it for Uber all day. It saves him having to pay for the parking. And he then picks it up at the end of the validated and he drives it home. You know, so it saves him parking and the car gets better utilised. Is there something there about encouraging people on the Isles to not even necessarily own the car, but to be part of the pool, which means that the car's then, if you're commuting and you're off island for a lot of the time, you take it to the slip and leave it and it's then correctly positioned. So I think there's something better we could do with thinking about the transport you want on the individual islands. And then the other thing, which is something we're going to pick up on, we haven't said, but I might as well say it now. We're going to be having a go at the EV strategy in January to do a rewrite on it, because basically when we wrote the first one, 2017, the aspiration was, hey, do you think we could possibly get 1,000 cars on the road in the next 5 years? And we're already at over 500 in that period, and so we've got 2 years still to go. So we need to get ready for the next EV strategy, which will be basically getting towards probably 5,000 cars. So there is going to be an opportunity to chip in quite a lot in the EV space. But the fundamental, I think, that comes out of what we've seen of late is that most people, or most cars, are better charged when people are asleep. So having charging at the point you leave the car is probably the way a lot of the charging is going to operate on the Isles. Once you start your morning with a full charged car, the amount of public charging you need is comparatively small. So that's probably, I would have sort of thought, where that's going to go.
Thanks for that, Neil. And I think it's quite interesting. Car Club, something that we've been looking at, and it's thinking about what's the kind of tipping point to critical mass, but also what the kind of price point is and the kind of structure around the pricing of things, which I think is two things we need to give a lot more kind of thought and work to. But yeah, that's good. Thank you. I think Willie next, and then Martin, then Nick after Martin.
Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. That's my ignorance. The other thing I was in agreement with trying to discourage folk from taking cars to the islands for a day trip. I would say that would be the improvement, but in a situation where you've got a family of 4 or something like that going to one of the islands for a week's holiday, then it's obviously much better to travel with your stuff and everything else in a vehicle, plus the fact you're probably going to use the vehicle when you're on the islands. But I'm talking about the bigger ones in particular, and you could be staying at a place that is not easy to do with limited public transport on the islands and such like. So there is a different outlook on it, but I would think you're probably right to go forward trying to discourage vehicles going out just for a day trip.
I think that's right. There's always going to be a balance, because you can't do it for everybody. I mean, there's a lot of old folk come out to the Isles to go and visit a grave or see friends and family, or a day trip, and expecting that kind of folk to not come with a car, or even take an electric car would be quite some step for some of your older folk that aren't used to it. So it's doing what you can for the different pockets where it's going to make a difference, but also not disabiliting the ones that are not going to be able to do what we want them to do, if you see what I mean.
Yes, Anne, I see what you mean, but if the ferry's full, then it doesn't matter if you're disabled, you can't get on. So making space in the ferries will help everybody.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Martin, I think you were next.
Okay, so I wanted to originally make a point or a question about what Willie said about sitting down and making sure we get the right vessel and don't rush into something that's just a replacement for what we've got. To my mind, the vessels that we have have not enough vehicle capacity and possibly more than is needed in terms of passenger capacity. And the way around that is, as somebody's already said, if you build a catamaran, you can build a catamaran with twice the vehicle capacity and the same running costs as a conventional vessel probably. And you don't need a massive crew if you don't have a massive number of passengers capability. So you need to right size it. You need to be able to take 40 cars and maybe 150 passengers. That would be about the right size for a vessel, in my view. And if you get down to that numbers, I think you could get away with smaller crews. If you have smaller crews, you can utilise the same number of men to run more boats, and that leads on to what's really needed is as short a service as possible, a point-to-point service. You don't want to be going to Stronsay via Sandy if you can get straight to Stronsay. You don't want to be going to Sandy via Reedy, and so on. And I've sat down and looked at this, and I think you need 4 North Isles boats able to do a return trip morning and night to the 4 larger islands. That's what you need. And you've got, with the staff you've got already, the numbers of staff that need to be retraining in roles, you could probably do that if you make your passenger size the right size. You would never run out of capacity for cars if you build it so that they can take the right number of cars. And it's thinking it through. How are you going to run for the next 20 years? That's what's needing to be done now.
I think you're absolutely right in terms of all that understanding and thinking everything through. And I think I try to touch on that in the introduction in terms of really also thinking through what the implications of the decision would take about the next vessels and how the network is structured, what the implications of that are on our island communities, both economically and socially, I guess. Interestingly, we've had a fair bit of feedback also that there's more want around being able to travel inter-isle and not just having everything focused on Kirkwall, both from everything in terms of can we make the islands more sustainable and move food and different goods and services between our islands, also thinking about visitors wanting to get between the isles. So there's quite a complex balance that's required in terms of what the needs are from the network going forward. But we need to be having these discussions with our islands to really tease beneath that and find out what's needed and what the implications of all of that are.
Well, I know from experience that it's a right best getting from Flotta back to the mainland if you've got to go via Lyoness, and about half the times that's what happens.
And that's probably right for Flotta in terms of what it needs, that going back to what each island actually needs. I think this is one of the areas where, Naomi's question mark about being bold. We're in a kind of tricky situation where there's a big bit of work that's going on and it's being done in the council around the ferries, but there's kind of very little opportunity to somehow influence where that's going and how it's going to end, I guess. So, that's maybe one of the thinking pots of how can we be bold and actually have some influence on where that eventual decision is going to go. I don't know the answer to that one.
But why I don't understand why you think going from Flotta to Lyoness to get to Houghton's right for Flotta.
I think I was reading the complete opposite.
Ah, right, sorry. You say I was right in suggesting that.
For
Is that what you're
Flotta.
saying?
It's right
sorry.
for Flotta. It's right for Flotta, but for other isles, having an inter-isle link could make a big difference to the sort of the future, the viability of particular islands. I'm talking about, for instance, where there's education or there's food or there's freight between 2 islands. Having a service that goes solely in and out of Kirkwall doesn't allow that to happen inter-isle. But from your perspective for Flotta, you don't need to go via Lyoness, so it's just a pain in the the backside. So no, I totally agree with you on that point.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you said it was the right solution.
Is that a good point to go to you, Nick?
Okay. Yes, I was going to refer originally to what Mike and what Neil had said, but I think Martin's put an additional interesting aspect on the viewpoint I was going to express. I agree with everyone. We really have to think through what we need in terms of ferry replacements. And I don't think it's anything like the service that exists now. But my viewpoint is that taking Neil's suggestion about there being cars at each end of the ferry transport or bicycles at each end, I think that we actually were going to need a lot less vehicle transport capacity, not more, Martin, because looking forward, we can reasonably expect to see the possibility of operating unmanned freight vessels within a reasonably short space of time. But they're really becoming quite advanced in their development now. We saw the drone being used for transportation of mail. That is a resource that if you had half a dozen of them at much, much less cost than anything involving a ferry, they could be used on a continuous basis to different isles. Even isles that don't have an airstrip at present could perhaps make use of them as well. So I think we have to take a really big perspective as we begin to think about what we need from a ferry service going forward. And I really believe that the thing that unlocks living in the Isles is the ability to get to the other islands and to Kirkwall swiftly. And that unlocked, and this is about moving people, not about moving things. The things can go at a slower pace in multiple different ways in future, without having the necessity of the huge infrastructure of a ferry. They don't have to move alongside people. They can be brought together. And yes, there will of course be occasion when somebody wishes to take their car with themselves in it. But I've just to pick up the example that Anne said about, somebody perhaps going out to visit a grave. This is where the isle that you're visiting can then help you, because transport yourself in a much more comfortable lounge, much more comfortable condition than our ferries currently offer, and you're met by somebody who can then take you to do what you need during the day, spend the whole day with you if you like, and it still doesn't cost you much more than it would now, or any more than it would now, to transport your car out, because we're using other resources to underwrite the cost of this public transport system, which is what we're actually talking about. The next stage from that is actually to evolve it into a digital demand response transport system. So you need to go somewhere, you can dial up and you have it. And it's about having a mix of buses and Uber-style vehicles that you can dial up to take you, having electric bikes, push bikes if you want them, if it suits your physicality, easy to walk paths that you're not going to get soaked and, well, not going to get muddy on, you can't change the weather. So you choose your transport accordingly. But all this has to be taken into account in all the aspects of what we're going, because things have changed so dramatically in the last few years, and they're going to change even more dramatically in the next few years. Take account of all the things that are running there alongside parallel routes, which should contribute to how we expect to be living, not next year, but in 15 or 20 years' time. And that's the lifespan we should expect of a replacement ferry. I live on Shattonsea. I'm particularly interested that, what's going on with the Shattonsea ferry. I actually hope that's the last of its kind like that, because actually then what comes after that will be a different way of moving freight and a different, faster, much faster way of moving people, so that people can commute from any island. And if they need to town to work, or improve digital community access can make people to work at home as well. Big vision, but that's what we should be talking about when we think of transport. It's not just about what type of bus runs on the X1 or what type of ferry runs between Kirkwall and Shattonsea. It's about creating an integrated system which everyone can benefit. And I really believe that visitors to this island, and perhaps income from the suggestion from Councillor Sankey of a light railway, You know, it shows that there's going to be finance coming in from renewables in the future as well to the councils. So this is what we should be thinking in the big picture. It may be too big right now, but this is what Naomi's challenge, I think, is right now, to pull all that together, and I'm willing to try and help. Thank you for listening.
That's super. Thank you, Nick. And I think I've just worked out that Zoom orders people on my screen in terms of who's put their hand up in which order. So if I'm right about that, I think, Willie, you were asking to come in again. Or if not, maybe could I go to Susan Kirkbride? And then the other Susan.
Hi. You were asking what we think works well. I know, I think it was Nick has just spoken about the X1. I mean, that actually does work quite well, apart from when you want to go to the airport, because you get into the bus station and then the bus sails off just as you're getting off. So it'd be quite good if some of that could be a bit more joined up. Somebody may have put something like that in the chat. So that doesn't work very well, just the joining up. I think if you get off the boat, the bus is usually there waiting for you. It does seem to link in, but some of them don't. I'd just like to echo what Mike said. And perhaps this feels a bit, I don't know, evangelical, but almost before every council meeting and every agenda, maybe at the top of each agenda in big, bold type, it should say, what are the carbon implications of this agenda before every single meeting? I know that sounds a bit wacky, but just to perhaps try and draw people's attention to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, I don't think that's wacky. I don't know how many of you know me. I've been in Orkney for 3 weeks. No, 5 weeks now. I'm at Heriot-Watt University, professor of energy transition engineering. And so the remit that we have is to bring a lot of brilliant people in to do PhDs and masters to work with the community to essentially re-engineer the way that we think about these kind of whole systems. So that I've been doing in New Zealand for the last 20 years. And the trick seems to be to understand our history, understand how we got where we are, and that for the last century or so, well, maybe not even a century, let's say 50 years, the strategy has been to keep up with growth and demand. Well, as you're building more, getting a bigger ferry, getting a longer runway, you're actually inducing demand because now you can. And so you come to think of that whatever somebody might conceivably want to do is what we have to build a system to accommodate. And that is perfectly legitimate in a world awash in oil at an extremely low price. That design will work very well. Now we're at a point where the design has to move to what will work in 50 years from now. And that really changes things. It refocuses the attention on what actually needs to get done. And then that doesn't necessarily look like a set schedule that's going to run empty buses and empty ferries. It might look like a request system where people who need something can request that, and then the system can service it. And so just that change in some of the cities in New Zealand that we worked on, that would reduce fuel use by 50%. And free up a lot of land and free up a lot of resources. And so I understand that it might not be, it's real close to what Nick was talking about, this idea of let's back up and just say, wait a minute, if we were going to say, okay, what needs doing, and then figure out how we would meet that. It might also be, think of if there wasn't any council service. So what would the market actually come in and do? They would figure out, well, what's worth doing? And then that's what they would do. So just, yeah, those weird thoughts throw in there for today. But that's what we'll be doing here. So there is a big resource coming in this area of how to build these strategies as a design that's just a different way that accomplishes what needs to be done, what's worth doing, what's valuable to the economy, what's valuable to society with what we've got.
Thanks, Susan, and nice to meet you. My screen's telling me it's back to you, Martin.
Will he available yet or not? He was before me, I think.
We won't fight about it.
Oh, there.
You go first, Willie.
Okay, I'm going to throw in a wild card here, and I don't know if it'll be achievable. I assume here we're mainly talking about the internal ferry system urgently in need of replacement at the moment. So the fact that is so badly in need of replacement, particularly for the Outer North Isles, and that means it might not be achievable this time around. But as a retired seafarer with a bit of experience in ferries, I can see that there are infrastructure constraints on, I'm not against catamarans, I can see the advantages, and particularly with relatively sheltered routes, and there is some possibility of reduced manning. One of your other members has suggested, although these things are strictly governed by the likes of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency and that, and don't just be too hopeful about them changing overnight. But the thing is, when there's a lot of money to be spent for the future, maybe one of the things is trying to link a couple of the islands. Now, this is, I know folk will think it's absolutely terrible, but I would be seriously contemplating bridging or tunneling to Shappensea and having a terminal in the north of Shappensea. Obviously, breakwater building and such like is costly, but we're going to go forward. People have talked about 50 years or whatever. If you then brought the Eadie and Westry link by a fixed link, you could bring the stuff down through Westry to a terminal at the south end of Eadie, where the existing pier is, roughly, and that dramatically reduces your sea journey. Likewise, you've got Loth and Sandy is not too far away from the north of Shappensea, and if they came out of the village in Stronsea to the west side, which was suggested when the RoRo system was introduced or planned to be introduced in the late 1980s, but it was deemed to be not easily achievable at that time. But going forward, it's maybe worth thinking about that, and that is a very dramatic thing. It won't be cheap, but it could secure it at a much more cost-effective basis for a goodly time into the future, rather than just producing something that's little better than what we've got now. Everybody's recognising what we've got now is not particularly good. Sorry for wasting so much time.
Not at all, not at all. I think they're all good points, things that need to be looked at. Thank you. Martin?
The reason I raised my hand was that I can see where Nick was coming for what's it going to be like in so many years' time. I can see that happening. But the point is, we actually have to build something that can replace, in almost a step change, what we've got now. So we've got to have something that is perhaps different from what we have now, but not so different that people can't adapt to a new system. So at the moment, we still have lots of people who take their cars. Now, the one thing that's not been said is, what about all those folks who take the car into Kirkwall every other week to go to do the shopping? We've got to change that if we want to stop people doing that. We've got to, we've got things to do with making the island shops economically viable and all sorts of things like that. But I think we've got to stick with, can we do something that is reasonable, is an improvement, and is on our way to what Nick is saying now. Nick was saying in the future we want many more inter-island services so that you can go from, say, Sandy to Westray. That's not an easy route because there's an island in the way. But I've done Sandy to Westray in a boat, and it takes a fair while. But if you want that service, even on demand, you're going to need quite a few vessels. So having more, smaller in capacity in terms of passengers, but potentially still quite large capacities for vehicles, makes sense. You run the ferry. If you get a peak load, then if you've got a big ferry, you can cope with it. And one thing that tourists especially find frustrating, I think, about Orkney is they come to Orkney and they find they can only go to a particular island on a particular day. And if that's a day that's bad weather, they don't like it. That's the reality now.
Thanks,
Whereas if we had the capacity to take a lot of cars on those days that it was needed, it could happen.
Thank you. Dave, back to you.
Okay, don't want to hog too much. I wondered if I might ask Willie to draw a map of some of the things he was talking about. It sounded to me some really good ideas there about connecting the islands. Coming back to other points, I think this is something also Willie said, has said a few times. The ferries are broken now, so they need to be replaced now. Now, what we seem to be saying is it doesn't matter who's responsible for them, and this is a big project. It will take a long time to get round to it, and it must be done right. But it also has to be done now. So a good tactic I've seen in situations like that, a good management tactic, is to say, well, okay, we haven't got a strategy for replacing the ferries. What's the date by which we're going to replace them? And work back from the date we're going to replace them by to say, when do they have to be designed? And then say, well, when do we have to have the responsibility for creating the plan assigned? Because I think there's the date that we need to decide whether it's the Scottish Government is doing the plan or the Orkney Islands Council is doing the plan. I think the date was about 10 years ago, not now. So I think the Orkney Islands plan ought to include in it, when are the ferries going to be replaced? Just put a date. Don't have to say what they're going to be replaced with, but put a date on it and say that's what we're working towards. And the point that was made about decarbonising being top of the strategy, there's a moral issue, I think, for everybody in Orkney, which is that the carbon footprint of people in Orkney is higher than anybody else in Scotland, as you probably know, because of the ferries. So the number one thing that Orkney people have to do is stop generating carbon on the ferries. So that means the first input to the new ferries is going to be they don't use diesel. Full stop. You just don't consider diesel. It's just not. It shouldn't be allowed. Just like the Scottish Government has said, the UK government has said there shall be no petrol cars after this date. It should be fundamental that, number one, who's in charge will replace them by the state, but they will not use fossil fuels. I'm finished. You'll be glad to know.
Yeah. Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I just wanted to develop something I'd said in the light of what Martin's just said as well. I do understand, Martin, that I'm being right out there with this and looking further ahead than perhaps is practical at this moment. But I would like to make the point that if the point of us developing a strategy, I think, is to have vision. And if new ferries were to be ordered tomorrow, there is still sufficient time to create the kind of car sharing service that Neil was talking about, to develop the bike share schemes, to make it work, so you don't have to have the to even develop something like the drone. I think that was a reasonable success as far as I can read in information. I don't know if it's still running or not, but that, if that wasn't a success, there will be others that will be a success, because this is something that needs to happen, is going to happen. And that can, with imagination, that gives you the chance to order something online from a shop in Kirkwall in the morning, and have it on ED, Westbury, wherever, in the afternoon for you to pick up, without having ever had to do it. So what I'm saying is, there is a lead time between ordering a ferry and it arriving, and that, if you have the strategy and the vision and you bring it all together, okay, big deal, big challenge. There is the opportunity to put the other bits of infrastructure in place before the ferries arrange, and there is a need for change. And ultimately, I'll put to you that it will all come down to cost for most people. I can actually, I make use of the co-wheels on Kirkwall Pier. I can go. If I'm only going over the office for a couple of hours, it's very, very convenient for me to pick that up, whiz out to Hatston, go and do some shopping, come back to the pier and come back. Whereas I would previously have taken the car over to so I could get all that done in the time. I now hire the car for 2 hours and get it all done, for going over as a foot passenger. I show people, give people a carrot, they don't need to stick, and money cost will be the carrot. And I really do believe that we could make those sort of services almost free to end user if we leverage all the money earning opportunities we can have from visitors and from support from other places. Maybe that's a utopian idea, but there's no harm in being utopian every now and again. So I do take your point, Martin, but I cannot really conceive of any justification for building ferries with larger vehicle capacities in the future than we've got now, just because people wouldn't want to change. I think people would change if they're given the opportunity to change in the way that others and myself have spoken about. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And there's not a hand up, I don't think, just at the moment. So I wonder if I can come in and on the back of that, Nick, and I like your utopia. It's something I wanted to maybe tease out. I was just trying to write down a bit of a question, because I wondered if anybody's got any thoughts on how we kind of marry up between the decarbonisation agenda, but also the kind of, I think there are quite big issues around poverty in Orkney, and it's really quite dispersed across our communities and often quite hidden. And I guess I'm thinking about lower income households that maybe either don't have access to a car, so have difficulty kind of getting to jobs and things, or people who are kind of forced, because of the household income, in perpetuating that kind of very old gas guzzler. It's all they can afford, but they need it to get to work. Has anybody got any thoughts in terms of how we can perhaps marry up those two kind of issues? Neil?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a real challenge there, because we are the value of cars is going to change dramatically, because as we get towards no new petrol cars, then the value of petrol cars is going to fall off a cliff. But there are going to be residual areas where it's going to work, and it strikes me that we're probably going to end up with island communities where it is worth having a petrol car, because you travel such a short distance actually on the island. However, there's also an opportunity to reposition the first generation EVs largely to islands, because when we had the first EVs that had 40, 50 miles, or like my Leaf for 70-mile range, that would be perfectly adequate on a lot of islands. So it feels as though we're likely to see a sort of a migration of older EVs to the Isles. The other thing is, I think we could also see is that we could get away with EVs on aisles which have got a shorter range, because at the moment all of the thrust with EVs is about increasing the range of cars. And I find it strange that you can go to a showroom and you can generally pick the colour trim of the leather interior or the wheels or the paint colour, but you've never been able to choose the size of the fuel tank. So it may well be that the size of the fuel tank in an electric vehicle, you'll be able to prescribe a vehicle of a comparatively low range because you are only ever going to use it on West Street, let's say. So maybe that is, so I can see there could be some changes that could come in here where you're starting to tune the vehicles to the market, especially if you've got the alternative travel arrangements that have already been piloted, say with Reflex at the moment, which is if you need to, you can go and borrow the Tesla. You're a Reflex member. You can, if you need to go somewhere and use the Tesla, use the Tesla. So there are, I think there are, making our inter-vehicle shift easier may well actually open up some opportunities.
What does that mean in terms of price points, Neil? Sorry, Naomi. I was just wondering. You're talking about the kind of cascading as your electric vehicles get older. Are they still going to be quite expensive, or are they going to get to a kind of an affordable level for the sort of lower income?
Yeah, one imagines they will eventually get to a lower point, but they're probably most likely to be the least reliable. Because I mean, that's why cars get cheaper over age, isn't it? Because they don't look as nice, and they blow a bit of smoke, and you might not get through an MOT one day, and that's really why the value tends to fall off them. So I think the same thing will happen with EVs, and that as they become less reliable, the batteries degrade, one would assume that the price on those will start to come down. But that's going to need some time, because we could be looking at 20 years before the petrol vehicles have sort of worked their way through their age profile, unless there's a scrappage scheme or something like that. The other thing I'd also add to it is that we need to recognise that running an EV is a much cheaper process than running a petrol vehicle. So there is a potential for some social equity to step in and provide those vehicles. Instead of being an EV scrappage scheme, it's an EV portage scheme that you start thinning out the older ones to the aisles and actually give them away, or provide them at a subsidised cost, because they will still have utility with those short ranges. But that would be a degree of social levelling that could go on.
Thanks, Neil. Nick?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Neil's just said. And just to add that, I mean, it underwrites as well the costs of running something like co-wheels in the aisles, because they are the more expendable vehicles. They are the overused, their end of life vehicles. So long as they're still clean, comfortable, tidy, and safe, I would never fear of going out in a vehicle with 30-mile range on Champensy, for example, or probably 20. If I'm going to take the dog up the furthest point of the island to give him a run on the beach and bring him back home again, it's only going to be 15 miles. If I drop round at the bottom of the island, it's probably going to be 17 miles, because I'm nosy, I want to see how the harvest is going. But that's sort of how it is. And Anne's point about I think it was Anne. I mean, do we need to own these? The object in the end is to get towards not having to own them, and that's where this the demand response transport systems idea comes in, because you need to go to the ferry for 9 o'clock. You're at the ferry for 9 o'clock. There's a car you can pick up on the other side. There is a sharing and a great sense of community, I think, if you actually made that system work. And to answer your original question, Naomi, I mean, this is where we can find community benefit from tourism and community benefit from renewables coming into our waters and things like that, because you can give people a credit to use, which could become a monthly credit. So instead of, as well as, or in place of, or instead of paying your council tax, I suspect you'll still have to pay your council tax, but maybe something you get back because everybody's managing what is a £50 credit a month or a £100 credit a month, or it's so much per person, towards using these transport systems, and it could be a great deal more than that. I actually think there's only 20,000 people of us out here, and there's no real prospect of that doubling in any point in the future. So there really isn't huge sums of money in the scale of the renewables we're talking about, in the scale of the tourism that's going on. I mean, there's more. I'm told there are more coaches booked to come here in 2022 than ever before. For example, you know, coaches coming over from ferries, as well as there being a volume of cruise ships we haven't seen before. But so, as most of you may know, I'm working on scoping for a cruise strategy at the moment with not a final strategy, but what it should include. And so Naomi and I have actually already had conversations around this. But there are ways of finding money to help underwrite equitable access to these car schemes and ferry schemes and so forth that you might consider. And those who can pay will want more and pay more, perhaps, for other services. But there is a utopian dream behind this, and I thank you, Naomi, for liking that, because I really think there's a chance to do something great for our community in this strategy and some of the other strategies that are roaming around at the moment too.
Thanks, Nick. Am I missing any other hands or anything?
Are we going to go on to aircraft next, or?
Say again, sorry?
Well, we've been talking about the ferries. Are we going to talk about the air service next, or?
We can. I don't think we're particularly full. I guess we've gone down the line of ferry for a little while now, but there's not a particular focus on that. Just anything really.
Well, because there was a mention about this point-to-point service. People wanting to travel into Isles. By far the best way is by aircraft, especially if you want to do something like Stronsay or Sandy to Westray or Papa Westray, because the demand would probably be small, but the routes for a ferry are quite long, and therefore for speed you need to go aircraft. And if you want to do Shappensea to Westray, why wouldn't we build an airfield in Shappensea? A relatively cheap thing to do for people to fly from Shappensea to Westray, for example. Or even Hoy to Edy. I remember going on a plane one day and the lady was going from Hoy to Edy. And she'd had to catch a ferry and out to the airport and then the plane out to Edy. She'd been all day at it.
Are you speaking about electric planes here?
Well, either electric or hydrogen. As long as they're zero carbon, it doesn't matter, does it? But the likelihood is that we'll have zero carbon aviation in Orkney before we get replacement ferries the way we're going on. Honest, you know, Logan Air are fairly confident they'll have them by 2025. I do think that could be much more energy efficient, rather than ever taking a ferry from one island to another. If you want to get from one island to another, take an aeroplane.
Yep, thank you for that. Willie, did you want to come back in?
Yes, I could say some things about aircraft, but that's not my speciality. Are we interested in the external ferry services at all?
Yeah, totally. I mean,
Hello?
I guess I was going to say, we obviously recognise that we don't, I guess the council doesn't directly provide them, but insofar as government provide them, and there's usually, at least on paper, the opportunity to feed into that process of design when the next contract comes round. So we're totally kind of gathering thoughts on that to feed into that process. But I guess we'll recognise that it's a government, in terms of Northing, a government provided service.
Yeah, okay, there's a big concern about freight capacity at the present time. And one of the things that I would like to highlight that probably a lot of people don't realise is that there's two big salmon producers in Orkney. Only one of them processes their fish in Orkney. The other one processes all their fish in Shetland, and they're carried to Shetland in whaleboats, but then when they're processed, they are carried south further afield on lorries. Now this is a massive impact on the southbound ferry service from Shetland and to a lesser extent Orkney. It means that it's quite difficult to get vehicle space southbound at various times of year, particularly right now in the run up to Christmas. It also proved quite difficult in the peak livestock export season, and the booking for vehicles, as in passenger cars and tourists, is quite difficult between Lerwick, Kirkwall and onwards to Aberdeen at quite a lot of the time in the year, particularly at weekends.
Yeah, but I know that is a big issue, and I think it's not made any more easy by the fact that the kind of hold space, so you can't book, but it might actually be available at the last minute depending on how many loads are coming down the way. So yeah, that's something that we've got captured in terms of an issue for sure. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Dave?
That's me. Okay, yes, the external ferries, from a carbon point of view, until the Aberdeen ferry is running hydrogen, is it actually viable to have these things steaming up and down to Aberdeen? Is it not actually, are we not going to be forced to take the short route and use trains and things on the mainland? I don't think we can just assume that going to Aberdeen on a fossil fuel powered boat is viable in the next 10 years.
I'll come in on.
I kind of agree with that. There was Alf Baird did a talk some time ago, and basically what he was saying was, if the ferry went from Shetland to Aberdeen direct, instead of coming via Orkney, it would burn half the fuel than if it comes via Orkney. And coming by Orkney actually reduces the capacity of the Shetland to Aberdeen freight anyway, because some people are coming from Shetland to Orkney and some going from Orkney to Aberdeen. So in terms of efficiency with the existing vessels, it's a pretty inefficient way of using it.
Yeah, and you see my point, Martin, as well, as that is to say, well, we'll change it to hydrogen in the distant future sometime, maybe is fine, but it's not enough. What you have to say is we're stopping using diesel now, so what we're going to do now, and the answer now might be take it on the short route to the mainland rather than just do nothing and have all the cows piling up in the islands.
And from Orkney to Aberdeen, I agree, but we still need an Orkney to Shetland service.
Yeah, I'm just saying we shouldn't assume that things are going to, that the links are going to continue to be from here to Aberdeen the way they are. We need to think about it.
Yeah.
Neil?
Just coming on that point that Dave was making there, I suspect that the ferries, those large ones, will actually end up running on ammonia, and the ammonia will be made from hydrogen. So I think that will be the defossilising route, and I think that will get driven very much by the large intercontinental shipping, who will basically choose the fuel that will get used for for biggish boats, because you can't really easily go transatlantic with hydrogen, because it's a nightmare to handle and get those volumes into the vessel during the period they're in port before you then set off and go transatlantic. So suspicion at the moment is it'll be ammonia, because it's already handled as a cargo widely, so there's already the capabilities and skills for a lot of it, but it's just not used as a fuel. So once those are ammonia, that will probably then drive the next size of ship down, which is probably the stuff that we got going to and from Aberdeen. I think Martin's absolutely right about the routings, and the Who Pays the Ferryman book that Edison, what's his name? Can't remember his name, who produced, is a really good book that explains what's going on with the ferries, isn't it? And basically, Alf wrote the foreword, but somebody wrote, was Ron Pedersen, was it? Who did a piece with it?
Oh yes, that's right, yeah.
Basically what it says is ferries should go the shortest possible distance because it's always more efficient on road. So I think we do have to be careful which way we're going to go with the Aberdeen side of things. So I would have thought ammonia is going to be the main thing. And of course, the principal opportunity we've got with ammonia is going to come around flotter in due course. Because if they're producing hydrogen, converting that to ammonia is comparatively straightforward. It takes about 15% of the calorific value to then convert it from hydrogen to ammonia. So I suspect we're going to have quite a lot of ammonia available in the county, to which we can tap into.
I think the big boats will turn it back to hydrogen because it's more to actually generate electricity to drive the boat, because that's the most efficient route.
Yeah. So MAN are producing diesel engines for ships that are coming out in 2 years' time, but the other option is a high temperature fuel cell, which basically cracks the ammonia at about 500 C, turns it into hydrogen, which you can then put into a fuel cell. So I think there's a fork in the road coming, and we'll see which way the technology leads us. But I'm sure it's going to be ammonia at the start of that fork.
Thanks, Neil. I'll come to you, Mark, but I might just briefly interject and play devil's advocate. And I guess just coming from what I choose, I guess thinking about traveling south, I would always choose to spend as much time where I want to be, and I never take a car south, so I'm always straight on a public transport. So I always choose to go Aberdeen, because I feel like it's my overnight. I'm asleep on the boat, so I don't notice it, and then I'm straight onto the train south or onto a bus or whatever I'm going over Inverness way. So for me, I would always choose Aberdeen, and I see that as more efficient because I can get straight onto public transport.
You're absolutely right.
And also from the perspective from the islands, it works so well because I can leave here in the evening and get straight onto the boat at night. So I'm just playing devil's advocate in terms of how that integration works, but also that kind of efficiency from a user perspective.
Yes, no, sorry. You're absolutely right. And the problem is that you don't see the carbon consequences of what you're doing, because when you buy a ticket, you're paying in pounds, not in carbon dioxide. If you did it in terms of carbon dioxide, you would probably get a hell of a shock, because I still go in the Aberdeen boat because it's more convenient. But yes, it's a problem, I think.
Just a quick bit of context there. The boats that come to Orkney from Aberdeen use about as much electricity as Orkney does when he gets here. They're 25-ish megawatt ferries.
Yeah.
Just terrifying.
Yeah, and that was the point. They only use 12 megawatts at a time, I think, when they're going to Shetland, because they just go slower. Just use 2 instead of 4 engines.
But sorry, I was interrupting, Mark.
That's okay. Just a couple of things. One, on this ferry thing, the problem is if you get to Thursday, of course, it's a diesel train, which pollutes more than anything under the sun. That outdoes cars, planes, ferries, and everything else. So, if we are starting to look at journeys, we're going to have to look at joined up ones. And the other thing is, I do wonder why we don't use our assets more. I mean, those ferries spend 14 hours a day tied up, which commercially doesn't seem to make any sense, let alone you know, from capacity, why you build another ferry or extra ferries rather than just use the ones you got a bit more? I just don't understand.
Which ones are you speaking about, Mark? Sorry.
The North Links, they spend at least 12 hours a day tied up, probably 14 on average.
All right, the one in from Stromness.
No,
I mean,
the Rossi and the Gatland as well. You know, they're tied up in Aberdeen or Shetland all day.
But they're actually at sea for 12 or 14 hours, so they can't be tied up for 14 hours a day. That's what I was thinking.
Well, they leave at 7 o'clock at night if they go to Shetland, arrive at 7 in the morning, don't they?
Yeah, that's 12 hours.
Okay, but
yeah.
What I'm saying is, you know, you're using it half a day.
Yeah.
You look at an aircraft, you don't do that with an aircraft.
No.
No, totally get the point. And yeah, and I guess a similar situation in terms of the Stromness route. There's far more time spent alongside than there is moving.
Yes, but Mark, the biggest disaster on the ferries is the fuel they're burning, not the capital cost of the ferry itself.
Yeah, but if people are talking about building more ferries, bigger ferries, surely a smaller ferry going more often would be more
I don't think anybody was, but I mean, I don't know if anybody is saying we need to build bigger ferries on the external routes. But if you're saying that, then are you saying having a smaller boat going more often?
I think we touched on earlier there are capacity issues on the Shetland service, you know, on the Aberdeen service. There are capacity issues. So I guess the point is, do we sail more to address those capacity issues or build a bigger vessel next time round?
Yes, okay.
Just noticing we're coming up at 8:45. We normally try and knock it on the head by about 9. So do we want to get on to the... Did you have a plan about the top 3 priorities and stuff? Are we going to sift that out to the boards later?
I was going to suggest... I might be sitting too close and I'm echoing. I was going to suggest maybe I'll try and transpose everything onto the boards, and perhaps I could try and draw something out, or Anne and I between us, and circulate something around. And then that would just give opportunity if we've missed anything, or if there's anything else that people want to feed in, they could do that.
I'd say yes. Anybody else? Anybody want to wave frantically to say no? Generally thumbs up I'm seeing. Okay, that's good. That sounds like a plan, Naomi. Okay.
That's super. So honestly, thanks very much. I've really enjoyed that, and I think there's a lot I've taken from it. And like I say, we'll put that together onto the boards and share something, and then give folk another chance to feed anything back. And then I think Neil, you just referred to that you were going to kind of kick things off in terms of EV strategy in the new year. We're working on this over the next few months and into the new year, so maybe a chance that we can touch base again at that point and see where we're both at and see where we take things from forward from there. Because I think, like I said earlier on in the when I was doing the presentation, we're really keen that we kind of align with everything else, so it would be good to align with that piece of work as well in terms of what we're capture within the LTS around that strategy.
And when do you plan to have the LTS out, Naomi? What's the timeline for it?
We're kind of working towards the end of this financial year.
Okay.
Roughly.
Okay. Good. Okay. I'm going to draw this to a close then, if that's okay with everybody. So firstly, I'm going to say my sincere thanks to Naomi and Anne for being willing to, I was going to say come out on an evening like this, but it's not quite the same, is it, when you're doing it on Zoom, something? You know what I mean? But really to provide such useful insight and to facilitate such a useful conversation. I think a lot of ideas have come out today, which frankly we wouldn't have had sitting at home without exchanging ideas between us. So my sincere thanks to you for making it happen. My thanks as well to everybody for staying the course, because we got 16 people on. We pretty much had 16 all evening, which is also a good sign. So well done for not drifting off. And thanks for everybody for contributing their ideas so openly. This is the start of something, and we stand a good chance of being able to chip in more ideas as things materialise. So if you do wake up screaming in the middle of the night, or find yourself written something on the pad by the side of the bed in the morning that you can read, then do feel free to chip that in as well. I think the link will still, well, if you want to know, I think the board will be available. I'm assuming we can find a way to give people more access, or just email them to me if you want, and we'll work that out. A couple of things else that are going to be on the go. One, there is an OREF quiz next Tuesday night, if those people are interested in coming along to that. So quite a lot of you look sad, energy, anoraks enough to think that would be an interesting evening. So do feel free to get in touch with the office at oref.co.uk, and we'll get the link for that. We're also going to be doing a session on the National Planning Framework 4 after Christmas. And as I mentioned, we're going to do in the EV strategy one as well. So which you're all more than welcome, but you do not feel obliged to come. There will be no guilt if you are missing. So really, I'd just say thanks, Rush, indeed, everybody, for this evening. Does anybody else want to say anything finally? If not, we'll just say good night.